Us streaming on Facebook and YouTube. If you'd like to see us, you can find us by searching for KUOW Public Radio. Well, on Tuesday, the Centers for Disease Control recommended that the vaccinated join the unvaccinated in wearing masks in indoor public spaces in areas of the nation where cases are increasing. Seattle and King County's health officer, Dr. Jeff Duchin, came to the same conclusion last week and recommended everyone should wear masks in indoor spaces. Health officers from 7 other Western Washington counties did the same thing on Monday. On Wednesday, Governor Inslee recommended that everyone in the state wear masks in indoor spaces. And I'm curious, from the three of you, has your personal masking policy changed at all with this new guidance this week? How about you, Jasmyne?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like before the last week and a half or so, I've been pretty lax about having my mask on, at the grocery store or just kind of walking out, going to Target, wherever. I always have it with me to, go on public transport or going to some of the other businesses that always require masks. But I think in light of the new CDC recommendation and it funneled through the state level as well, I've definitely started masking up more in places like the grocery store, getting takeout at restaurants. And that kind of those kind of situations, just because I think I know more people who have got COVID that are vaccinated than I did at this time last year before the vaccines came out.
Well, that's a good reason to do it.
Right. Yeah. And so I still see people. I still walk around outside. I'll go to bars, but I definitely have been using my mask a lot more, and I'm like, maybe I should get a new one, just kind of switch it up a little bit. Right. Because it seems like we're going to be having it for a much longer time.
Renee, what about you? Are you remasking, or have you been masking all along? What's your personal policy been?
I got a little laxed about maxing for quite a while, but I'm definitely wearing the mask again, especially with the Delta variant, which is, twice as, contagious as the original virus. And obviously a lot of the new cases, 96% here in Washington, are from the Delta variant. So you bet I'm going to wear my mask. I'm going to protect myself and those around me. And I really encourage other people to wear their masks too, because honestly, this is definitely a community effort. We all have a role to play. And as much as everyone hates it, we got to put it back on. That's what I have to say.
How about you, DJ? Are you remasking? And what do you see when you look around in your neighborhood? Are you seeing people masking up more? What's going on?
I'm, I guess, a little bit of a mask curmudgeon.
That's a mask curmudgeon. I love it.
Mask curmudgeon. Obviously I'll follow the Department of Health directives. And if I go into a store and they ask for me to wear a mask, I will, of course, respect that. But generally speaking, I am not wearing it more than I think I have been. I think I'm actually starting to wear it a little less. And I even went into PCC yesterday, where it says we support mask, the guidance from DOH that we wear masks. And there were a few people in there not wearing masks. I did not go back to my car to get my mask. I thought it was okay. And I sort of endured the side eye from people at PCC while I walked through. And I don't know if I'll keep doing that, but I might. And I just feel like, if you're vaccinated, which I am, you got to live your life a little bit. And people who are unvaccinated, I respect them to make their own choice, and we're going to continue to see that regardless of what we do. There's not going to be adherence to any sort of vaccine mandate, even if we had one, and I don't think we will. So we're going to be in this place where a few folks just are laggards in this space, and we're going to continue to have this conversation for years. And I'm ready to be mask-free as soon as I can.
Well, we'd all like to be mask-free. Here's what Governor Jay Inslee had to say about the mask mandate.
Obviously, we need to think about masking for everyone in the state of Washington. So we are recommending statewide that people consider wearing a mask regardless of their vaccination status, and give thought to the type of conditions when you are indoors about wearing a mask regardless of vaccination status. This is only a recommendation. It is not a legal requirement. I know it's frustrating for people to even have to think about that, but that's the situation we are in. And the more people that get vaccinated, the less we'll have to think about this.
Now, when it comes to this, just a recommendation from the governor, not a mandate. Jasmyne, is that the right approach to take at this moment?
Well, I think I definitely feel kind of conflicted about it. I think at least here in the Seattle area, a recommendation does mean a lot. I think Seattle takes the virus pretty seriously. Even anecdotally, I'm seeing my friends mask up more. I'm seeing people in the club wearing masks too. So I think the recommendation does carry a lot of weight. I think Inslee said that he didn't want to make it a mandate because he didn't want to take the benefit away from Washingtonians that have been vaccinated, and he hopes that vaccination rates will go up. But that being said, as a vaccinated Washingtonian, I'm definitely willing to slap that baby back on if it means that more of our unvaccinated Washingtonians are safe, and if we can figure out a way to better vaccinate and reach communities that need it, so be it.
Renee, you told us you think the governor should maybe go further and require at least the unvaccinated to wear masks in indoor public spaces. Why do you think that's a better public policy?
Well, I think it's just good public health policy. Obviously, we need to do whatever we can to curb the rise of COVID, especially with this new Delta variant. And wearing a mask indoors, I think, will benefit everybody, protect those who are the most at risk. And then also, he's talking about, making a mask mandatory in schools, which I think, would be great for those in my family who are teachers, including my sister and her husband. We really want to keep this virus, out of communities, out of homes, out of businesses. And so I think that if anything, it's not mandatory yet, not for now, but I think that if we don't do something now, if we don't start masking up now, we're unfortunately going to have to make it mandatory. So I think the governor is taking the right step here.
Well, President Biden just announced that federal workers will be required to get vaccinated. And that's a move that New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has also taken. I gather, DJ, from what you said earlier, you don't think Governor Inslee should follow suit.
No, actually, I think that is smart and within the rights of an employer. I mean, it has to be negotiated with the union leadership. But if you're an employee, particularly in an at-will state, you need to follow the directives of your employer, whether those are bargained or otherwise. And I think that's a good move for the governor to follow.
Well, how about mandatory showing that you're vaccinated to get into a store? That step, do you think that is justified?
I think that actually puts a lot of onus on small businesses, and then, some will enforce it and some won't. And it just kind of gets, confusing for the folks who want to enter. But certainly if a small business owner wants to make that request, I'd certainly suggest, I think that would be a great idea if that made them more comfortable for their business.
Jasmyne, what do you think about this? Should it move to mandatory mask wearing, as some businesses are doing and as we're seeing state governments recommending?
Yeah, well, this week I had a chance to speak to a few music venues around the city about their policies, and what we're seeing is kind of a patchwork approach to it. So places like Numos, Queer Bar, Clockout Lounge, they've all instituted you have to show your proof of vaccination in order to get in. And that can be a physical card, that can be a photo, that can be like just kind of flashing something on the screen. You have places like Cremwork that have always been requiring proof of vaccination, who are now masking up their staff and doing temperature checks at the door. And then you have STG Presents, which runs Paramount, The More, Neptune. They aren't requiring proof of vaccination, but they're asking everyone, regardless of their status, to wear a mask indoors to be able to go to a concert. And you're seeing this in bars across the city as well. And, I think there was a report earlier this week that came out that 9 bars had to close down last weekend because they had workers who either came into contact with someone who had COVID or came down with COVID themselves. And so I think that as we're kind of seeing more vaccinated people get COVID, I think it'll be actually a pretty smart business move on behalf of small businesses to require people to show some proof of vaccination to come inside.
I was in Oregon, down in the Corvallis area, when some of these mask mandates came in, and a lot of the people there were expressing tension over having to be the person at the door to enforce this. Now, Seattle might be different, but you've been out and about, Jasmyne. Is there any kind of tension around this when someone's asked to mask up?
No, I haven't. I personally haven't seen it. And I think, bars is a very specific situation because they're already checking IDs. What's another kind of thing to check at the door? I think so I haven't really seen any scuffles break out, but we'll see as more kind of pop out.
Let's keep our eyes open for that. You're listening to Week in Review on KUOW. I'm Ross Reynolds in for Bill Radke. Few thought we'd ever be in a world without COVID entirely, but many of us had the sense that there'd be slow and steady improvement. But over the last weeks, that hope has been shattered. What's this 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or vice versa going to mean for how we live our lives going forward, DJ? It's kind of unpredictable.
Yeah, and I think, this is because there has been an effort at public messaging from federal and state officials to give us one vision of our responsibility as citizens. And sometimes that was, bend the curve or flatten the curve. And sometimes it was, do this for grandpa and grandma. And then it was, it sort of changes over time. And so we have had unclear expectations about what the end game looks like. But what I think we have learned from our reporting and in conversations with public health modelers, they have all been clear actually for months, going back to May, that this disease is endemic and is never likely to go away in any of our lifetimes. And what that means is, first, public messaging doesn't reflect that, because it doesn't help in public messaging to tell people, hey, actually, this is not going away. So the messaging around vaccinations needs to be, do it for your families, do it for your friends. That's effective. So the messaging is different from the reality. The reality is COVID is going to be with us. And so then the question becomes, if it's never going away, so what? Well, modelers will tell you whether you're vaccinated or not, you're probably going to get COVID. Just like if you're vaccinated or not from the flu, you're probably going to get the flu over the course of your lifetime. And that is what they refer to as a seroprevalence of 100%. And so if you're in that headspace for a second, if you know you're going to get COVID at some point over the course of your life, there's actually a perverse incentive to get it sooner than when you're older. And so I'm not saying go out and get sick, but what I am saying is we want to build up our immune response through things like vaccines, through things like booster shots. And if we happen to get sick, all of the data shows us overwhelmingly that if you're vaccinated, you are very unlikely to have complicated symptoms. You may have no symptoms at all.
Yep.
And as you have those asymptomatic or low symptom experiences, you're going to build up an immune response that will help you so that when you're 60 or 70 or 80, this will not be as much of a thing. So I think we have to, what that tells me in our reporting is like, we have to think differently about this risk reward situation. And we can't expect a zero COVID place. We have to learn how to accept some risk for COVID, just like we accept some risk for the flu.
Well, it all kind of plays into how it affects our lives. And Renee, I'm wondering what you're thinking about these 2 steps forward, 1 step back, the kind of back and forth that's going on. Is that affecting everybody's kind of ability to go with these changes? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's disappointing, and it's really affecting everyone's mental health. Honestly, there is a possibility of a world without COVID, but we're going to need everyone to be a part of it, including those on the other side of the aisle, the conservatives, the Republicans. I spoke to Dr. Fauci in March about this, and he said the politicization of COVID and of masking has been a big detriment to encouraging people to get vaccinated. I do applaud Mitch McConnell on running some ads in Kentucky, encouraging his constituents to get vaccinated. So I think that we really got to do everything, pull out all the stops, reach into minority communities, hire messengers that they listen to, work with organizations that already work with immigrant and minority populations, and really do whatever it takes to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to get a vaccine in a way that's appropriate for them, is culturally sensitive to them. So really, it's going to require everyone to do their part, and I'm really hoping that we'll see more Republicans rise to the occasion. We'll see more people talk to their doctor about getting the vaccine. We'll see more minority communities finally getting the message.
Thanks very much. We're going to live last word in the segment to Walla Walla County Health Public Officer Daniel Kaminsky. Spoke to KUOW's Elise O'Neill about this question for KUOW Seattle Now.
Everything on every side of the issue, good and bad, true and false, and people have their belief systems. And sometimes I sit around like, what was one thing that I would say that would change their mind? And I'm not convinced that I have that ability and power to do that. I think if I had a loud, forceful message, some people would be very happy with that. Like, yeah, it needs to be said, but it's going to make it's going to push those people further away from me. And then we have no chance.
It's Week in Review with staff writer for The Stranger, Jasmyne Keimig, publisher of the Washington State Wire, DJ Wilson, and contributing writer at Seattle Gay News, Tacoma Weekly, and Unite Seattle Magazine, Renee Raketty. I'm Ross Reynolds. We'll be right back.
I'm Julian Marshall, host of BBC News on today's program. The first group of Afghan interpreters who work with US forces has been evacuated to the United States, and how the woman who was once Africa's richest has lost the title as she's further stripped of her ill-gotten gains.
BBC NewsHour airs this afternoon at 1 o'clock.
Support for KUOW comes from the Washington State Department of Licensing. Renewing a driver's license or ID card online can be done from anywhere at any time. Information on how to renew a driver's license or ID card online at dol.wa.gov/renew-and-go.
77 degrees in Seattle, but we're not done yet. The forecast says we're going to reach 92 today under a sunny sky. This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:23, and it's KUOW's Week in Review.
Yikes, even makes me happier to be back in the air-conditioned studios of KUOW for this week's Week in Review. Ross Reynolds in for Bill Radke with Jasmyne Keimig, DJ Wilson, and Renee Raketty. Well, next Tuesday is the final day you can vote in this year's primary elections. Endorsements are out. I don't know about you, but my mailbox is full of mailers, candidates working hard to prove they're different from their competitors. But are they? I'd like to ask the three of you, what has stood out for you about these races this year? DJ?
I think for me, I'm sort of most surprised so far, and I could obviously be wrong. There's a long time left before the general election, but I'm most surprised that Senator Joe Nguyen hasn't had more of a compelling candidacy for King County executive. I'm kind of surprised that Lorena Gonzalez appears to be slipping pretty considerably in the conversations I'm having. I feel like she was a really strong front runner, and now I think it's a 50-50 chance that she maybe doesn't make it through the primary.
Is that kind of anecdotal, or have you seen some polling that suggests that?
Well, there's some polling out there that is, maybe only anecdotally. It's an email or an online poll, but has her at 12% and has Colleen Echohawk at 10% close behind, and Bruce Harrell is, I think, at 24%. Justin Farrell down at 6%. There was like 53% of those respondents were undecided. So that's a big number. But what that means is those people, particularly if these are primary voters, and I wasn't clear about that in the polling, if these are just a likely voter subset, which is different than the general election. But if it's a likely voter subset, then they know Lorena Gonzalez and they know Bruce Harrell, and they are not selecting them. So then the question is, how does that 53% break if they're not breaking for the leaders? Is there a third candidate like Colleen Echohawk that can galvanize some of that support more than Justin Farrell, more than Casey Sixkiller, et cetera, and slide in second place? And I think we're probably going to see that happen next week.
Renee, how about you? What are you looking at when it comes to the primary election? What races are attracting your attention?
I've been following the Seattle City Council race very closely, the mayoral race. I think for those who are, looking to see or get some social justice, some kind of, big change out of the mayor's race, I think they're going to be disappointed. I think we're going to see probably, Council President Lorena Gonzalez and Bruce Harrell emerge as sort of the front runners for the primary election or for the, election in November. So, I don't think we're really going to see a whole lot of change. And I think a lot of people in Seattle are asking for that right now, especially when it comes to racial justice, gentrification, growth, housing costs. The candidates have been speaking to those issues, but it's pretty, middle of the road.
Jasmyne, do you agree with that? Do you think we're not going to see a whole lot of change in this primary?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm like, I've had my eye on the city attorney's race, which I think will be actually pretty spicy. I think, incumbent Pete Holmes really thought that he was going to sail through, but I think recent polling shows that his challenger on the right, Davison, and his challenger from the left, Nicole Thomas Kennedy, are really kind of polling equally with him. So I think that, with next Tuesday we could see, what homes not make it to the general, right? And he's been which would be kind of a really
pretty
big
rare.
shock.
Yeah, pretty rare for an incumbent like that to go down. So, and I think he's also expressed some concern. He's said, I might not make it through the primary, and when the candidate does that,
yeah, that's never a great sign. And, he's kind of been on Twitter, pulling up some old tweets from both Davison and NTK. So, which I feel like is really, a kind of cash grab. And so I think that Tuesday will really depend on voter turnout to see, if Holmes will be able to make it to the general in November.
Well, it's so interesting that some of his opponents are trying to tag him with, he's the person responsible for criminal justice and for prosecution. So they're trying to link him to the disorder that took place among people who are upset with that. And it's not the mayor, it's not the police chief, it's the city attorney. Do you think that's effective?
I think there is some weight to it. I know that he came under a lot of heat for countersuing the Seattle Times over their lawsuit over Mayor Durkin's missing texts, and he had to walk back that lawsuit. He dropped it, and I think he expressed a lot of remorse over it. So I think that attacking him in that fashion could work really well.
I don't really have any conclusions about what's going to happen, although I do feel if Bruce Harrell does not make it past the primary, that would be a major disappointment. DJ Wilson, you think there's any chance of that happening?
I would be very surprised if Bruce Harrell didn't make it through the primary. I think he's the sort of safe brand for people that are like the old school Seattle that want some, they just want to clean up the town kind of thing. I think the question is like, who does he face? And I think if his best, he's probably out doing like get out the vote for Lorena Gonzalez right now, because if it's him and Lorena Gonzalez, then he can run against the city council.
Yeah.
If Colleen Echohawk gets through, or if Justin Farrell gets through, then you will likely hear over and over and over again, former city council member Bruce Harrell. So in the same way that this is not playing out in King County exec race, but it is playing out in that city attorney race, where there's this strong anti-incumbency, this strong anti-institutional element. So I think Bruce is the lead coming out of the primary, and I think it's arguably very difficult for him to win in November, because even people who are not too excited with Gonzalez, there's just not a lot of excitement about Bruce Harrell. It's like people say, I've seen that movie before, I don't need to see that one again.
Well, Renee, you seem to be saying that you felt as though this outcome would be more conservative. Some of the fervor we saw earlier the year might not play out in these primaries. What do you think about what DJ just had to say?
I think that, DJ is right in the fact that Bruce Harrell is definitely going to be running against Lorena Gonzalez and members of the council. A lot of people are unhappy with some of the protests that happened throughout the last year. They feel that we've gone too far and maybe sort of cutting a little bit of the budget of the Seattle Police Department, that, crime may have become a problem here in Washington. Although I disagree with that. I believe major gun crime is up, but certainly not, regular crime. Crime has been going down for a very long time.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a moment. That's actually one of our next topics. We're going to take that up in just a moment. But before we do, it's important, I think, to note right now that speaking of elections, across the country, we're seeing a concerted effort by Republican legislatures to tighten up on voting rules. And opponents say it's simply a blatant attempt to depress the turnout of Black and Latino voters. Supporters of stricter voting regulations say they'll eliminate fraud, although there have been very minor and few instances of voter fraud documented. Well, one mechanism for controlling elections is redistricting, the process by which voting districts are redrawn when the population changes require it. But redistricting can be fraught with mischief. Districts can be drawn to weaken the voting power of certain groups. That's called gerrymandering. Well, Washington State is redistricting this fall. Now, I've heard in the past that unlike other states, we have a pretty fair system here of redistricting. DJ, you've been looking into this. What can you tell us about the upcoming redistricting?
I think the definition of fair is in the eye of the beholder. Unquestionably, Washington State's commission model, where you have 2 Democratic appointees and 2 Republican appointees, and 3 of those 4 members have to agree on maps. That has been heralded for decades as an example of a bipartisan process that is open and transparent, and in as far as it can be, apolitical, because it's at the commission level. It's not left to the legislature to draw. However, over time, Washington State has become statewide about a 58% Democratic state. And under our current statute and our current Constitution, going back to 1983, when we redraw the maps every 10 years, we have to redraw them in a way that gives no partisan advantage. And so because no partisan advantage has been by custom defined to be a 50-50 map, where both sides get equal districts, equal chances at swing districts, what you see is actually a mitigation, a depression of the statewide Democratic performance from 57% to a map that is 50% Democratic, 50% Republican. And one where you have to have a Republican vote. It's usually by consensus at this point, all 4 members. And so that 7% disadvantage for Democrats in Washington State, 7% advantage for Republicans, is as much of an advantage as Texas gives to Republicans. So we, in our bipartisan, national award-winning fair commission model, we rewrite the map in Washington State in the legislature to be equal to Texas in terms of the partisan advantage for Republicans. So very few people think this is coming, but I'm here to put a marker on it. If anyone will take this bet, I think that it's very possible we will have a Speaker of the House who is a Republican next year after the 2022 elections, because you have the midterm elections, which are always, generally speaking, against the president's party in power. Only 3 times since 1934 has the president's party in power won seats in Congress. And at the legislative level, we're going to have that same kind of headwind in an off year, but the map is going to be set at 50-50. So the Democrats are going to have to outperform in 2022 what the map will be drawn for them. And they're going to have to overcome the national headwinds vis-a-vis the midterm elections. So, we got earthquakes on the horizon if we're not careful.
Jasmyne, you also agree there might be some inequity in this redistricting process we're going to see coming up in September. What are your concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll definitely defer to DJ on this issue, but I definitely think that the needs of Black and Indigenous and Washingtonians of color absolutely need to be prioritized when it comes to this new redrawing some of these congressional districts. I know that the 4th and 5th congressional district what are my directions? Out east. They have their current north-south configuration kind of disadvantages the tribal population on the Colville reservation between the 4th and 5th districts. They can't all vote for the same candidates. And Walla Walla County is also split up. And so I think that it'd be really important to make sure to keep a lot of these communities' voting power intact so that they can vote for folks that accurately represent their interests and aren't just, someone who hasn't had their lived experience representing them. I think that's also true in the 9th district in South Seattle and South King County, where it's really one of the most diverse regions in the United States. It's really working class. And so I think being able to adequately vote for someone that represents them is super important when it comes to this redistricting process.
Renee, you said, go ahead.
Just to jump in, as a 46-year-old, I will defer to Jasmyne on what happens in the club.
I'm so good with that. Yeah.
Renee, you kind of raised the flag about the 9th congressional district when it comes to redistricting. What are your concerns there?
Well, 4 out of 18 of the most diverse zip codes in America are in the 9th district. And so, whether or not it benefits minority communities there to include, white and affluent communities, is something we need to watch. I'm also concerned about the census because obviously it was disrupted this year. So there's a lot of minorities that may not have been counted. So that's, again, something we need to watch. And I know there's a meeting tomorrow with the, redistricting commission. So we'll see about the 9th. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, how about that? Does the public have much input into this when the redistricting commission meets? If people are there expressing concerns, are they generally taken into account? Do we know from past history, DJ?
Yeah, the commission has a set of public hearings in each of the different congressional districts, and then they do some with other stakeholders as well. And one of the bits of feedback that are coming out of that are are things like that, which Renee and Jasmine are talking about, which is we want to hold together communities as much as possible so that they can have a unified voice. And community is an interesting thing. It becomes politicized, actually. In conversation with Senator Slade Gordon, we had a few years ago, who is the master of redistricting and served on the previous redistricting commission. He's, of course, passed away, but he said that there were only two communities that were bisected in the last redistricting commission, a school district and a community. I think it was Kent, had a line through it. But that didn't reflect other non-governmental lines like the Yakima community and tribe or other tribes. Those divisions. What he said when he said that communities were held together and not bisected, he was not talking about some of these non-traditional, or in his view, non-traditional communities.
This is the Week in Review. I'm Ross Reynolds, in for Bill Radke. A rash of shootings in Seattle last weekend has raised concerns about policing. Police and Mayor Durkin say that dozens of resignations at Seattle police have left the city unprepared to deal with violent crime. Meanwhile, a recent study put the question of police staffing into sharp relief. It showed that Seattle police spend 66% of their time on responses that don't require police presence, and only 8% of their time being spent on violent crime responses. Well, there are some questions and some doubts about whether those exact percentages are right. But if Seattle police are spending a lot of time on incidents where they're not required, who will respond to those types of calls? I kind of don't see any other entities ready to step up to handle these calls. Jasmine, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really presents an opportunity for us to speak about, or to really think about community safety measures that can kind of come into place, especially for events where that are a little bit lower stakes. Like, to my mind, like marathons, parades, public processions, funeral processions, things that police normally are the ones kind of guarding. I think a lot about how last summer, when I was a part of the protests, for George Floyd and for Black Lives Matter, the Seattle Bike Brigade, which is a grassroots mutual aid collective, were some of the ones to kind of put their bodies and their bikes in between traffic and people protesting. And so I think that would be a really interesting model to see if we can kind of replicate similar things like that to kind of make the police not as necessary, throughout the city and with events that they normally are a part of.
Renee, do you think that there have been dozens and dozens of police officers who've resigned? Is this a problem for the city of Seattle? Some people want the police force cut in half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly there's been a call over the last year in the streets to cut the police force by 50%. I don't know, whether or not, that's a good idea, but I certainly believe that there's a lot of room for us to redefine, reimagine our police force. I know the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform last week said that 80% of the SPD calls are non-criminal responses. A lot of the folks that are retiring from the police department are simply doing that, retiring. There's been a decrease in, police recruitment for a long time. A lot of young people, especially the folks I talk to in the streets, are concerned about capitalism, and they believe that the police force, enforces capitalism. So they're out. They're not ready to, to join. And there is an attitude among the general public, according to law enforcement's own nonprofit organizations and their research, that folks just sort of have a more negative view of joining the force. So, basically, I think that.
Who wants to be a police officer these days?
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to be a police officer right now.
Tough road to hoe. I mean,
yeah, yes.
Where's RoboCop when you need him?
This discussion around staffing is increasingly revolving around violence across the country. There are those who say that Republicans are going to make inroads in the midterm elections because of a rise in crime. Now, just to put that in perspective, murders in the U.S. peaked in the mid-90s. The state broke that record last year. But if you adjust for population, the murder rate is still lower now than it was in the 1990s. And yet the murder rate last year did jump by a record 45%, which is staggering. And there are various spikes happening in cities across the country, whether police have been defunded or not, whether it's a blue city or a red city. And I'm kind of wondering about the impact of violent crime when it comes to policing, and it's the impact of it on social rest, pandemic tensions, and also these police staffing shortages. DJ Wilson, your thoughts?
Yeah, you're right to cite that difference between the 1990 murder rate. Murder should be put in some context. When we think of crime and the statistics and the repetition of crime, often we do not have one criminal who is murdering multiple people. Often a murder is a one-off kind of thing. And so it can increase, but we a lot of us don't have any interaction with murder, thankfully. But a lot of people have interaction in Seattle with petty crime, like theft from your auto, having your car window broken out and some old CDs taken or whatever. And the people that commit those crimes often commit them over and over and over and over again. And they're more broadly impacting the community. So while we have lower murder than we did in the 90s, people are experiencing these petty crimes that meaningfully impact their lives, like stolen cars or their house getting broken into. And that is driving this anxiety and this call for doing something around crime. I think the murder thing is scary and makes maybe good TV, but when you've had your car broken into 2 or 3 times the last couple of years in Green Lake or Capitol Hill, like it gets a little old, and you're like, isn't somebody gonna do something here? So I think that's where the frustration comes from.
That's the question. Somebody. Who is that somebody? Renee, who's kind of responsible for dealing with this? A lot of times police just come in after the crime has taken place. How do we deal with this?
I think that it is the responsibility of the city council, and of course the mayor as well. And the mayor's done some great things as well. She's talking about bringing in more community resource officers or community, and she's also talking about, doing her, I forgot what it's called, Triage One pilot program, which basically would use city employees to handle, behavioral issues, de-escalate situations, refer people to social services. I think all of those things are really good. And then also we have City Council member Lisa Herbold, who chairs the Public Safety and Human Services Commission. And she's proposing a protocol dispatch system, which like Triage One would, handle a broader way of calls to avoid, armed and sworn officers responding to situations. One thing I'd want to mention about gun violence is that look, during the pandemic, there was a huge increase of gun sales. And when you have more guns in circulation, there's going to be more gun deaths. So I think that is one factor that we need to take into consideration.
Jasmine, where do you think of the solution lies to kind of putting a lid on this crime?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Renee mentioned, I think kind of getting a handle on guns in the community. That's really one of the big things. I think also, really investing. I think it's kind of it's more broad than just directing or confronting the violence directly. I think that you also have to think about housing. I think you have to think about transit. I think investing in those types of other elements of society, I think would be really crucial to kind of addressing this rise in violence and rise in crime.
You're listening. Yeah, go ahead, DJ.
I would just add that I think that one of the central challenges in the police vis-a-vis crime conversation and how active and how engaged the police may or may not be, it's really a culture question. And there is a strong cultural divide between the Seattle Police Department and Seattle City Council and a lot of people who advocate and work in city politics. This kind of outlier culture of the Seattle Police Department needs to be changed. And I think that's underlying the call for cutting funding. It's not cutting funding from public safety. It's to change the way it's funded. So it's a different kind of community level public safety rather than police officer. And it gets into this cultural question.
That's DJ Wilson, contributing writer at the Seattle, who's the publisher of the Washington State Wire. Also with us, contributing writer at the Seattle Gay News, Tacoma Weekly, and Unite Seattle Magazine, Renee Raketty, and stranger writer Jasmyne Keimig. We're going to be right back. We're taking a short break. You're listening to the Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Delta Dental of Washington and Arcora Foundation, with a mission to make the state cavity-free by supporting community water fluoridation efforts for all Washingtonians as a way to help strengthen teeth enamel. Learn more at cavityfreewa.com.
The Prime Minister of Japan says that the coronavirus is spreading through the country with unprecedented speed. We'll go in depth on that today during BBC NewsHour, which begins at 1 p.m., just about 14 minutes from now, on 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. 79 degrees and sunny in Seattle. Forecast says we're going to reach a high today of 92. This is KUOW's Week in Review.
I'm Ross Reynolds in for Bill Radke with Renee Raketty, DJ Wilson, and Jasmyne Keimig. Simone Biles said her mind and body are simply not in sync in an Instagram Friday morning, while going more into depth on the issue that she says has plagued her since she arrived in Tokyo for the Olympic Games. Earlier this week, Biles withdrew from Thursday's individual all-around competition at the Olympics, one that she excels in. She wanted to focus on her mental health. At a press conference after the team's all-around final, Biles told reporters she just didn't feel right going into the event.
Today has been really stressful. We had a workout this morning. It went okay. And then just that 5.5 hour wait or something, I was just like shaking, could barely nap. I've just never felt like this going into a competition before. And I tried to go out here and have fun, and warm up in the back went a little bit better. But then once I came out here, I was like, no, mental is not there. So I just need to let the girls do it and focus on myself.
Jasmyne, what's your reaction to this world-class athlete pulling back at the Olympics?
I think it's a really profound moment for the sport, and I think for athletic culture in general. Biles is one of the best athletes in the world, undisputed. And I think that, her generation and my generation too has a much more robust understanding of the connection between mental health and physical health. And she talked a lot about how she was experiencing the twisties, which is something that gymnasts experience when they're flying through the air and have no idea where they are. And so it can cause them to land and hurt themselves. And they talk about how it's a really big mental block and very difficult to get over. And so I think that her acknowledging the fact that she's just not mentally in the right place, and she wants to, kind of put herself first after all that pressure that I'm sure that she's under from, the world's eyes on her. I think that it can be culture shifting, especially for a lot of young women and young athletes that look up to her. And obviously she kind of follows in the similar kind of vein of Naomi Osaka, who's a tennis player and also a Black woman who stepped back from the French Open earlier this year, also citing her mental health. And so I really hope that it's a trend that we see continuing, where athletes kind of put themselves and put their wellness ahead of, trying to fulfill any expectations that the world has of them.
And beyond just the pressure of being in the Olympics and being a star, there's also the context of the Larry Nassar trial, right, Renee? That's kind of maybe other trauma that she's experienced.
Yes, absolutely. He was convicted in 2018. So this is the first Olympics since, his conviction. And I think that certainly casts a shadow over her emotional health. It certainly casts a shadow over the USA Olympics. Although the Olympics, will be fine. But I really applaud her for respecting herself enough to know where her emotional line is, not crossing it. And of course, the Justice Department last week has, issued a report, and it's damning actually against, both the USA Gymnastics, especially its chief, Steve Penny, and its own FBI agent, Jay Abbott. So, I certainly applaud her for her role, for taking the stand. And I hope that it will inspire young, gymnasts and athletes in the future to do the same if they need to.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I just want to say that Biles also said that was part of the reason why she wanted to participate in the games this year. She didn't need to do it, right? She was the greatest gymnast in the world of all time. And she said that she wanted to be a very public face for many of the survivors of Nassar's abuse. And she wanted to be able to hold those in power accountable. And so I think that, and that's on top of her actually performing as an athlete. So I agree with Renee. I think it's a really commendable and a really radical thing for her to do.
And it kind of reminds you watch these amazing physical feats, and I am just thinking about what amazing it is that they can do those things. But the whole mental side of it, even when you've got past problems, as Biles did with the Nassar situation, makes you realize there is this huge mental element to it. DJ, your thoughts on Biles pulling out?
I mean, you call her a world-class athlete, and she is. I think she's also a world-class human, and I think this demonstrates it. I don't know her, but I know her by her actions, and her actions are so brave, and I'm just so proud of her. And I think there's hopefully something we can learn. When I think about the Olympics, I had sort of forgotten about this, actually, the segue just for a minute. I had forgotten about how powerful the Olympics are on kids and young people. I remember Mary Lou Retton in 1984 very clearly, and I'm sitting with my daughters now talking about maybe one day you'll be on the soccer field, and look at how, these swimmers are hugging each other, and look at how they're cheering each other on the gymnastics floor. So this moment is inspiring young people in ways that we don't always appreciate. And I think her, Simone Biles' action, it's just going to reinforce all of the things that we want for ourselves, but our kids also, that you take time to care for your mental health, and that you live a whole person, wholehearted life as much as you can.
Yeah, quite a moment. We'll see whether it continues to provoke these kind of changes in the future. Finally, today, we're going to return to elections for a moment. And this is a surprise to you guys, but we have a quiz for you. There are 8 candidates for mayor in the Tuesday primary, but I'm not going to ask you about them. Back in 2017, there were 21 people vying to succeed Ed Murray in the mayor's job. And what we're going to do is I'd like you each to name one of those mayoral candidates on the final ballot. Once you've named one, we're going to go along to the next person and ask for a name from them. And whoever can keep naming the candidates from 2017 will win and receive the fabulous limited edition KUOW t-shirt with "You Heard My Sound Story, Sound Voice" on the front. Do you understand how this is going to work?
I think
we're talking about the primary ballot, right? Not the general.
Yes. One of those 21 people back on the ballot in 2017. And some of them are still public figures. I don't know if it'll be super hard for you to do it. What we're going to do is rotate the order of who answers each round. And the first go round will be in alphabetical order. So Jasmine, can you name one of those candidates who was on the 2017 mayoral primary ballot?
Jenny Durkin.
And easy, a gimme.
Listen, I'm not above going easy.
Renee, can you name another one of those candidates in 2017?
Molly Moon.
Molly Moon. Carrie Moon, but we'll give that to you. TJ, can you name one of the candidates?
Michael McGinn.
Mike McGinn, the former mayor, who kind of didn't end up doing as well as we would have thought. Okay, back around, we're going to go back to you, Renee. Can you name one of the other candidates on the 2017 ballot?
Of course, Nikita Oliver, who's running for city council.
Very good, Nikita Oliver. Well, the high-profile ones are kind of going away pretty quickly here. DJ, you have another one to name.
How about Justin Farrell?
Justin Farrell, also kind of a prominent figure. And Jasmine, it's getting tougher every round.
I'm gonna get this wrong. John Grant.
John Grant. No, I'm sorry. You're out, Jasmine. But we still have 2 competitors here. We still have 2 competitors here, and I think we'll go back to Renee. Renee, can you name one of those 2017 candidates?
Larry Alberto.
Very good, Larry Alberto.
Wow, that is next level. I just want to bow down to Renee.
DJ,
That's
can
really
you live
good.
up to next level, DJ?
No, I can't. Gosh, was Good Space Guy on the mayoral ballot?
No.
He usually is.
Renee, you won. No, you guys,
seriously?
Renee, you won. You get the but you guys were all such good sports. You're all going to get t-shirts.
We're all winners.
Yay!
Send your t-shirt sizes, and we'll make sure that you all get t-shirts in this contest today. We're just about out of time, but a final thought on something that's made you smile and made you happy this week, Jasmine?
There's a new single from this New York band Porches called "Okay," and it's bright. It's also really pessimistic. It's a great pop song. I've been playing it on repeat. It's been such a good soundtrack to this beautiful weather we've been having.
Porches, okay. Mm-hmm. All right, check it out. DJ, what's making you smile?
2 great things. One, I've got this amazing community on our block and our street here, and just a lot of good-hearted people that are supporting each other, and that is fabulous. It's the reason, it's the thing that makes life so fabulous in many cases. And secondly, my kids, my 9th grader and my 8th grader, I have a younger one too, they're both getting into summer sports. My daughter's playing soccer. My son is entering into high school football for the first time, and he's sore every day from these workouts. And I love to see him complain that he can't lift his legs because he's working so hard. It's great to see them physically active and healthy.
And how about you, Renee? What's making you smile these days?
Well, I got an assignment to review some restaurants, and I have to tell you,
Sweet.
I love food, and if dining on someone else's dime is even better.
Wow.
There it is.
That's excellent. What a great opportunity for you to have. By the way, I just want to go back, and maybe you were wondering who are those other 17 candidates that I forgot about. Alex Zimmerman, of course, because that guy runs all the time for everything.
Yeah.
Gary Brose was another one of the candidates back then. Greg Hamilton, Harley Lever, James Norton, Jason Roberts, some of the other people who ran back in 2017. How quickly we forget. I want to say thanks very much to our panelists today. Staff writer of The Stranger, Jasmyne Keimig, publisher of the Washington State Wire, DJ Wilson, and contributing writer at the Seattle Gay News, Tacoma Weekly, Unite Seattle Magazine, Renee Raketty. Our program is produced by Sarah Leibovitz and Alec Cohen. Social media and live streaming by Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tea Popescu was also helping with our social media. Thanks for listening. I'm Ross Reynolds. Have a great rest of your day.